to be mistreated by people who see you as less than human, to suffer the effects of injustice and oppression and greed, is to be downtrodden. It's at this very point, at what's happening in our world, we cannot afford to be paralyzed by the thought that nothing that we or anyone else can do can make a difference. Did you know that 30% of Americans cannot dial a single phone number other than their own from memory? And even 20% of us can't do that. Still, in cases of emergency, most of us know who we would call, right? We may not have the number memorized, but we can imagine the voice on the other end of the line, the voice that we would want to hear when we're in trouble. Sometimes it depends on what kind of trouble. By the time they're entering their 7th year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Harry Potter and his friends have faced many harrowing experiences together, inviting adventure, cultivating belonging, facing fear, choosing wisely, seeking the truth, and even resisting real evil along the way. All of this we have witnessed during our Summer at the Movies series, which we're calling Harry Potter and the Good News. And I'll admit that when some of you suggested this series to me, I was a bit hesitant, especially in light of the author's harmful speech and action against many vulnerable people in our society. But I've come to see through the past several weeks just how timely the stories that we find in the blockbuster films and the best-selling novels really are for us today, especially when we examine them alongside the themes of our Bible. And so our series continues today, shortly after Harry Potter turns 17. At this age, he's learned more about weathering the storms of life than most people. And honestly, the worst is yet to come. So the calm before the storm finds Harry back at the home of the Weasleys, where preparations for a wedding have begun. And that's when Rufus Scrimgeour, the Minister of Magic himself, suddenly appears to pay Harry a visit. His appearance actually was quite explosive, Nathan. Just pops out of thin air. The beloved headmaster of Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore, has been killed, but not before preparing a final lesson. To Ron Weasley, who loves deeply but so easily loses his way, Dumbledore offers a guiding light. To Hermione Granger, the perpetually level-headed brains of the operation, Dumbledore leaves a bit of wisdom, dressed up in whimsy. Harry receives a token of an early victory at Hogwarts, the golden snitch that he caught to win his very first match of Quidditch, a reminder of the rewards of perseverance and skill, the will reads. The legacy that their mentor leaves lies not in the gifts, of course, but in the sentiment, in the awareness of the task that his students are facing, not in the classroom, but in life. The magnitude of the moment is not lost on the Minister of Magic either. I don't know what you're up to, Mr. Potter, Scrimgeour says. But you can't fight this war on your own. You can't fight this war on your own. So whether we want help or not, sometimes we all feel this way, don't we? That it's us against the world, it's me against the world, it's you against the world. I'm sure the followers of Jesus in the early church felt this way too. In fact, the book of 2 Timothy speaks of just that. The short letter from which we read today has long been attributed to the Apostle Paul. It seems now that it was likely written by a close companion after his death, but nonetheless, these words tell Paul's story. Verses 16 through 18 in chapter 4 are of particular interest to us today, but before we read them again, let's get a sense of Paul's frame of mind. This letter picks up Paul's story during his second imprisonment in Rome, just before he's beheaded for his allegiance to Jesus. His impending death certainly explains the emotional roller coaster of the verses that we read this morning. He's calling Timothy to come and to bring Mark, claiming that only Luke remains with him. The others have deserted Paul to pursue their own interest or have been sent to other areas to share the good news. But Paul's work is not finished, and he needs his things. He wants his cloak and his books, his notes, and his writing materials. And so he continues to reflect in verses 16 through 18. 2 Timothy 4, 16 through 18. At my first defense, Paul remembers, no one came to my support, but all deserted me. May it not be counted against them. But the Lord stood by me and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. So I was rescued from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and save me for his heavenly kingdom. To God be the glory forever and ever. Amen. All deserted me, but the Lord stood by me. The Lord stood by me. It's a statement so simple, yet so profound. We could really miss the meaning. It could slip by us unnoticed if we don't look a little closer. This man had traveled long and far, 30 years and 10,000 miles. With law enforcement breathing down his neck, he'd risked his life time and time again and was now certain to lose it. All for the sake of the good news of Jesus the Christ. And we see here in these words in 2 Timothy, the ups and the downs. We hear in the tone of the message notes of despair. We find ourselves in despair when we are experiencing a complete loss of hope. It's that point at which we feel paralyzed because we can't imagine anything or anything that we can do or anything that anyone else can do. When we lose hope, we feel paralyzed because we can't imagine that there's anything that we or anyone else can do to improve the situation. We're stuck. Well, looking back at our text for today, perhaps despair is not quite the right word for Paul's outlook in his final days of life. After all, people without hope don't call for help. Disheartened might be closer, but he doesn't seem to have lost any determination. Perhaps the word we're looking for here is downtrodden. Certainly, Paul's been strongly and consistently opposed and mistreated by people in power. That's what it means to be downtrodden. So I think that's the word. That's the word to describe what it feels like to be deserted by people you trust, to be mistreated by people who see you as less than human, to suffer the effects of injustice and oppression and greed, is to be downtrodden. But to be downtrodden is not to be without hope, at least not where Paul is concerned. After all, hope is a belief that something good is still possible. Something good is still possible. This is not wishful thinking. Hope is much more audacious than that. Hope responds to hate with love. Hope finds the will to resist oppression. Hope looks death in the face, trusting in the power of resurrection. It's with hope that Paul calls his friends Timothy and Mark to his side, having faith that the fight will continue with them, even when he's no longer able. You might remember from last week that faith is complete trust and confidence in someone or something. We talked about this explicitly 2 weeks ago. Faith is complete trust or confidence in someone or something. That's a tall order, beloved, which means we have to be very picky about in whom we place our faith. And it might seem through the words of 2 Timothy that Paul places his faith in his friends, and that has to be true to a certain extent, but his ultimate faith lies elsewhere. The Lord stood by me. He said, the Lord stood by me and gave me strength. I wonder what that looked like for Paul, practically speaking, as he suffered not only abandonment, but ridicule and violence as well. What did it look like for Harry as the world around him was becoming unrecognizable, twisted, and malformed? by a madman's cruel agenda. But what does strength look like for us today? The details will vary from person to person, but as followers of Jesus, we are called to faith not only in ourselves, but in our God, who will stand by us. It is faith that validates our hope and pushes back against what feels like despair when we become more and more downtrodden by life. If you hear me say anything today, I pray that it's this. It's at the very point at what's happening in our world. It's at this very point at what's happening in our world. We cannot afford to be paralyzed by the thought that nothing that we or anyone else can do can make a difference. We cannot afford to be paralyzed. We're not stuck by God's grace. But the truth is, we can't fight the wars that rage around us and within us by ourselves. And we don't have to. We're not alone. God is with us, and we are with each other. But I wonder, do you really believe that? I mean, have you really thought about it? So often, when we talk about what it means to be a faithful follower of Jesus, we emphasize the courage it takes to show up for other people, to be gracious and forgiving, to be long-suffering and loving, to be generous and encouraging. But I wonder, as the post-credit scenes fade, but life keeps rolling, who's standing by you? Do you know? The Lord, of course. But who are the people, the Timothys and the Marks, the Hermiones and the Rons, whom you can call to your side when you know you're facing a war that you can't win? At least not on your own. Maybe it's time to memorize their phone numbers. Amen? Amen.